The Human Comedy, the Musical. William Saroyan's death in 1981 reignited interest in his works. It was a different world than the 1930s and 40s had been, when the man was at the peak of his powers. Theater, or at least the musical form that has been popular on Broadway for decades, had gone through a series of dramatic creative explosions in the 1960s and 70s. From the introduction of the rock musical with Hair, the flowering of Stephen Sondheim-Hal Prince's collaboration, and the technological advances that included everything from rear projection to the computer-operated lights. Saroyan's plays had been hits, and a few misses on Broadway in the 1940s, with The Time of Your Life being both a critical and financial success. Saroyan had worked on bringing some of his works to the stage as operas, but never a musical comedy, as they were called at the time. That is doubly strange because he had talent as a songwriter, as is evidenced by his lyrics for Come On to My House and work with Alan Hovhaness. In 1983, 2 years after Saroyan had passed, work began on a musical version of his most popular book, The Human Comedy. Saroyan's novel itself was based originally on a script. The script had been written for Louis B. Mayer, the second M in MGM Studios. The script told the story of the Macaulay family of Ithaca, California, a thinly veiled variation on Fresno, Saroyan's hometown. The story as the driver, instead of serving a series of vignettes and character interactions that allow the reader to become deeply involved with the World War II setting and their growth. It is a story of a small town and the impact of a changing world on it. It is a story of a hometown during time of crisis, and it is a coming-of-age story. It has the Saroyan wit and pacing, as well as his clear understanding of character and dialogue. Many consider the book to be his finest work, and it has become his most enduring book. In the 1980s, one of the most influential writers of musicals still working was Galt MacDermot. He had revolutionized and scandalized Broadway in the 1960s with the rock musical Hair, for which he won several awards. He followed that up with Two Gentlemen of Verona, a rock and roll musical adaptation of Shakespeare that starred Raul Julia and Clifton Davis and was the Broadway debut of Jeff Goldblum. These had made MacDermot one of the top songwriters for the stage, though he had slowed somewhat since the 1970s. When his show Dude and Via Galactica failed at the box office, he was constantly writing, especially for films such as Rhinoceros, Gold Apples of the Sun, and Cotton Comes to Harlem. At some point, it's not entirely clear when, he picked up a copy of Saroyan's book, The Human Comedy. "This tiny book," he said in 1984, "it absolutely knocked me out." Later adding, "I thought he was the most original writer I'd ever read. Saroyan liked the people he was writing about a lot, and they liked music, and were always singing. That was the way the Macaulay family was, but they also take an interest in the minute details of their daily life, which I think is what theater is. You're looking at people doing a thing, moment by moment. Saroyan's people care about every little thing." Inspired by Saroyan's book, MacDermot began working on music for a show. His idea was an opera, but also not quite an opera. MacDermot had written operas before, notably 1969's Cressida. He began to work with author and librettist William Dumarsk to provide lyrics for the show. Dumarsk had worked on films Duffer, Cotton Comes to Harlem, and Mistress, all scored by MacDermot. The two worked up a show that would express the story entirely through song, and the songs would not be traditional Broadway songs. The music MacDermot wrote ranged wildly, from gospel to corridos, rock to calypso. Several of the songs take up traditional dance rhythms, such as waltz and rumba. The effect is an interesting one, as it refuses to settle the story of Ithaca in any single time or place, whereas Saroyan had taken pains to settle it directly in the Central Valley of California in the midst of World War II. MacDermot had gone to great lengths to capture his characters, though he had failed to notice an important element, World War II. Newsday reported, "It was as if he had a longing for a simpler time when happiness was singing about a coconut cream pie, as is done in The Human Comedy." His librettist, William Demarsk, pointed out the Pivical Telegraph Office in Ithaca sent out an awful lot of blackboarded messages of young soldiers' demises in the course of the show. Perhaps that was due to the fact that doomed soldiers shipped overseas was a major theme for Hare, but Demarsk made certain that the theme was retained. McDermott was determined for the entire show with no spoken dialogue, and this required Demarsk to create lyrics for every moment in the show. The idea of a whole show sung, or at least motivated by music, appeals to me, because I always get bored when the talk starts, McDermott said in 1984. To accomplish the amount of story the human comedy required, McDermott and Demarsk created more than 80 songs. When I wrote the human comedy, I wasn't doing it for Broadway, McDermott said, so I didn't feel any need for a conventional book. I told Bill Demarsk, who dramatized Saroyan's novel for McDermott, that I wanted to try to make the whole thing songs, even if a song was only one line long. So he wrote the dramatization that way. I wanted to use music to tell the story. The staging of the piece was as unusual as the music. The majority of the cast are on stage at all times, stepping forward to take on their characters in the piece. Several characters play multiple roles, and the stage was largely empty except for a couple of chairs and a few props that were essential to the story. This minimalist approach to the work had been pioneered by early versions of Our Town. While the characters are dressed as if from small-town America of the 1940s, the starkness of the set and simplicity of the staging allow the characters to inhabit some sort of no place, while still being of the time of the story. This fantastical element may have helped to bring the piece to an audience of the 1980s, so far removed from the reality of the war years. Despite the use of rhythms and melodies from across the American songbook, the score was unamplified. Essentially, McDermott told the Hackensack Record, I've used the contemporary pop rhythms, but they're played on acoustical instruments, strings, unamplified guitars, woodwinds, and so on. Because the piece is set during World War II, it was appropriate to use those instruments. The electronically amplified type had not been invented yet. The lyrical approach was likewise a bit unusual. Demarsk chose to write the lyrics in rhymed couplets, a simple technique that is one of the oldest in theater. Arguably the simplest form of rhyme expressed in poetry and song, it lent the music a certain simple charm that spoke to the commonness of the scenario being presented. The show itself received its first production under the watchful eye of Joseph Papp's Public Theater. The Public Theater was founded to bring new voices and theatrical concepts to the stage. The Public Theater's first production in 1967 had set the tone for the future of the group. Hare. McDermott's long association probably helped gain Papp's participation, including a fairly large budget for the time, $800,000. The show opened on December 28, 1983, at the Ansbacher Theater in New York, and ran through March of 1984. The off-Broadway run received good notices, especially for the cast. With no major names, though Mary Elizabeth Mastriantonio would go on to be a major star of stage and screen just a year or so later with the release of Scarface, the show was able to focus across the cast, which allowed the switching of parts during the show to work fluidly. The New York Times legendary critic Frank Rich said of the show, McDermott's music is far more sophisticated than the ambiance suggests. What usually prevents Saroyan's novel from becoming saccharine is its style, the riffs of language, and the edgy, eccentric narrative events. The composer preserves that tone in his score, which is written in the true operatic manner, recitatives included. As befits Saroyan's pantheistic sense of community, the music is highly eclectic. It encompasses gospel, jazz, swing, hymns, barbershop harmonies, blues, and plaintive lullabies. Rich added, not all of the score is at the same level. Sometimes McDermott's high aspirations outstrip the music, much as Saroyan's classical character names add excessive grandiloquence to his novel. Nor is William Demarsk's sometimes confusing libretto always up to the score. Papp, perhaps wishing to take a little more of his $800,000 he had laid out for the piece, transferred the show to Broadway, specifically to the Royale Theatre. The cast of the original production was retained, and that was seen as a bit of a risky proposition. Broadway at the time was dominated by flashy productions like La Cage aux Folles or Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, which the human comedy would replace at the Royale. Also popular were shows that showed off the talent of big names from films such as Shirley MacLaine, Ben Kingsley, or Ian McKellen. The show's niceness may be one of the liabilities in the age of the big thrill and $45 Broadway ticket. The Daily Times of Marnak noted, "Will audiences go to Broadway to hear good singers sing some lovely songs and tell the simple story of family love in wartime?" The show remained exactly the same direction, same cast, same score, same scenery. The result of the opening was not the same. The response from critics was much less rosy. Part of it had to do with the location. Newsday noted, "The Royale isn't as comfortable a home for the show as the public's smaller Ansbacher Theatre, for one thing. Miking, although less obtrusive than usual, breaks down some of the intimacy." While the upbeat, optimistic tone of the production was lauded in reviews of the original production, it became a point of criticism for reviews of the Broadway run. Clive Barnes, one of the leading reviewers of Broadway stage at the time, wrote a negative review in the New York Post. "It is warm and sentimental, and some people will find it too warm and too sentimental, like mushed over goo. I myself find it mawkish, and like all of Saroyan for me, fundamentally insincere and phony. Not all critics were so cruel." Michael Kuchwara, the AP drama critic, wrote, "The whole show is sung, and some of the songs are extraordinarily effective." John Beaufort noted, "In its musical form, the human comedy adapts the loving vignettes of Saroyan's novel to the operatic needs of aria, recitative, and vocal ensemble. Along with its poignancy and heartfelt feeling for home, the adaptation captures Saroyan's joie de vivre." The mixed reception from critics, coupled with the opening of two other major shows at the same time, Death of a Salesman starring Dustin Hoffman and John Malkovich, and David Mamet's Glengarry Glen Ross, as well as Sondheim's highly anticipated Sunday in the Park with George, as well as 6 other shows opening within a month of the human comedy, led to the show flatlining quickly. After only 13 performances, the show closed, largely forgotten as a footnote in the career of McDermott, though the experience seemed to have revitalized his interest in writing musicals, as he created several more before his passing in 2018. It was first revived by the Candlelight Dinner Playhouse in Chicago in 1989. The reviews were not as positive as either of New York's productions. Musicals in Multi presented the human comedy at the York Theatre in 1997. Though not a fully staged version, it received some notice, though again, largely mixed reviews. Later staging seemed to suffer from a different issue: the dated material and the now apparent weakness of Dumarque's lyrics and libretto. Musical theater has gone through 3 generations of evolution since the musical comedy first presented itself on the stage. The Weber-Rice era of the event musical breaking in the 1980s and early 90s, the explosion of Rent, another rock opera that drew in a younger crowd to the theater, followed by the massive, more mainstream Broadway audiences of the second decade of the 20th century, turning shows like The Book of Mormon, Wicked, and Hamilton into legitimate pop culture drivers. These churned older Broadway shows, other than nostalgia revivals like Oklahoma or Grease, into the harder sell, and with new audiences come new expectations, which have left minimalist and experimental theater feeling bland and colorless. No one has attempted a Broadway revival of the human comedy, though several regional and university theaters have done versions, including a 2006 version by the Barrington Stage Company in Massachusetts. Perhaps as the world rediscovers the work of William Saroyan and Galt McDermott's work receives more attention, we'll see someone attempt to stage it again, bringing the simple joy of a coconut cream pie back to the Broadway stage. Thanks for listening to From the Collection of Forever Saroyan. I'm Chris Garcia. We'll see you in 2 weeks.